What does it mean to be a changemaker? It's a question curators at the Rochester Museum and Science Center have been asking for the last 2 years. And tonight, we'll discover how they reached a remarkably inclusive conclusion. Welcome to Amended in Action, a showcase of contemporary efforts from across the region that challenge injustice, illuminate truth, and raise women's voices. I'm Michael Rickey. If you ride the glass elevator to the 3rd floor of the Rochester Museum and Science Center, you'll be on your way to an exhibit 2 years in the making. It's called Changemakers.
It was quite a process, and we think that the space has become a very dynamic as well as representative and inclusive exhibit as a result.
And when you exit the elevator, should we take a walk around?
Yeah, let's do it.
You'll see the exhibit starts by shattering the glass ceiling.
So we were able to partner with artist Tanya de Magalon, and she created this beautiful conceptual piece called the Broken Glass Ceiling. And so
that's my tour guide, the Rochester Museum and Science Center's Senior Director of Collections, Catherine Morano-Santos.
You enter into this beautiful hanging presentation.
She proudly points out the exhibit's first piece. It hangs from the ceiling, what appears to be large, jagged pieces of shattered glass, each with gold leaf edges, and a word selected by the artist to demonstrate common keys to success.
Identity, empowerment, opportunities, heritage, unity, teamwork, etc. So it's a really powerful statement, and it's both your exit off the elevator as well as your entrance into the main gallery of the exhibit. So I think it's the perfect piece to express what this exhibit is all about.
The exhibit introduces visitors to the inspiring stories of 200 women who were trailblazers, influencers, advocates in Greater Rochester and beyond. Some are living, others have passed. Collectively, their contributions span centuries. Yet there's a good chance even the most devout Rochester historian wouldn't recognize every name. That was intentional. The root of the project started with a desire to develop an original exhibit to coincide with the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, an exhibit that would spotlight influencers history overlooked.
Early on, we knew that we wanted to go way beyond just the suffrage movement and think about women's contributions more inclusively, and both from the past and into the present. So all aspects of women's contributions and the impacts that they've had on our lives.
Achieving inclusivity and discovering hidden histories took a village of collaborators.
My name is Rachel de Guzman. I'm an artivist in Rochester. I have a background in equity in the arts, fostering equity in the arts. I've gone through 2 fellowships in New York City, and so effective or best practices in infusing equity in the arts is my expertise.
Rachel de Guzman joined the project in its early stages.
The first thing that impressed me about this process was I raised the concern that there's no diversity really on staff at RMSC. And if we really wanted to have diversity, you needed authentic lenses in which to produce that.
Museum administrators listened. They welcomed more than 50 community curators to the team, formed partnerships with 11 community organizations, and hired 3 diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants. Senior Director of Collections, Catherine Morano-Santos.
So kind of from the point of exhibit concept until the finished product that you see here today, that group of people was not just advising us, but actually helping to make all the decisions on everything that you see in the exhibit.
De Guzman says the museum's commitment to including a range of voices in the decision-making process had a profound impact on the exhibit's outcome.
I don't know that I've ever seen in Rochester such a breadth of women or even of people ethnically and racially represented. And it's even to the point of making sure that it's intersectional so that you're not just representing ethnicity and racial groups, but you're also making sure that also includes people from the LGBTQ plus community. You're also including people that are differently abled, and so I think that's something that Rochester and Rochester Museum Science Center, and all the community curators who participated can be very proud of. And so I'm very proud.
Catherine Morano Santos.
The exhibit is inclusive not just of diverse women of the Rochester region, but also women of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and all of the communities that comprises, because in recognition that the RMSC in Rochester in general sits on the unceded lands of the Seneca people of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, we wanted to honor all of the stories of women of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and their connection to this land.
Letitia McNaughton worked as one of the exhibit's 3 diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants. She's Six Nations Mohawk and a PhD candidate in American Studies at the University of Buffalo. She played a key role selecting the Changemakers representing the Haudenosaunee Confederacy.
This opportunity of having nearly 40 Haudenosaunee women in one space is really rare and really unique. There's just so many inspiring stories there and so much inspiring work. I think there's a huge draw for people to come and see that, to see all these items, and to hear all these stories. It's just so much further beyond Rochester.
McNaughton was part of the team that helped collect the stories.
It wasn't simply researching a bio and compiling, a label or something together. I actually interviewed the majority of the existing contemporary changemakers, and we had these really wonderful conversations about their work and reflecting and what their story means and how they wanted to be perceived. I ensured that their agency came through and that they were able to definitely have a say in how they were portrayed.
One of those conversations changed how the museum categorized Joan Coles Howard's contributions.
Originally, the curators wanted to put me in the media group. And I said, no, I'm an entrepreneur.
The 80-year-old featured changemaker understood the confusion. On and off during her adult life, she worked alongside her father, Howard Coles, a pioneering black journalist and publisher of what became Rochester's longest-running newspaper, focused on the black community.
And yes, I worked on my father's newspaper many times, and the last 5 years, and I built the subscription rate, and yeah, I did that, and I'm proud of that. I did that in his honor and because we needed to keep the paper alive. But that was his paper. My thing was Uhuru, which is Swahili word for freedom. It was an African gift shop, boutique, they called it. The first black shop in Midtown Plaza, other than the shoe shine parlor that was there.
Her shop opened in 1969. It wasn't her first business startup, nor was it her last.
When I was a little girl, 8, as I remember, around that age, I had an orange crate, and I used to put bottles of cologne or toothpaste or hairbrush or something like that on, and sell it to my relatives. I'm an entrepreneur. I've owned 5 or 6 different businesses in my life. So I asked to be put in the entrepreneur space as opposed to the media space. The media was my daddy, and I just helped him because it helped us, all of us. And it was fun, too. I enjoyed it.
Her devotion to telling the stories of her community continues today.
Right now, I'm working with the Teen Empowerment Group. So that's the focus. And they're working with my father's collection as well. They're preserving information about the Clarissa Street neighborhood that I grew up in. And that's been fun. We've done some documentaries. We've shared a lot of information.
Building up her community by giving back to it through her time, talent, and experience. It's something Joan Coles Howard says she learned observing her parents.
Both he and my mother were involved in civil rights movements and housing and jobs and whatever, banking, everything. Migrant workers, they were involved, and I was involved because of that. Frederick Douglass was my father's hero, and he carried on some of the work that Douglass talked about, and it impacted me. I mean, you can't live with that every day. Sometimes I felt like Douglass lived in our house because his presence was so permanent and so always there. And so those kinds of things impact you and they stay with you. You can't live that life and then just suddenly turn it off. And I feel like he's been responsible, and my mother, for most of the things that I've done in my life. And it has to come from them because they raised me.
My name is Mimi Lee.
Mimi Lee is also one of the 200 changemakers featured in the exhibit.
I'm the president of the Asian Pacific Islander American Association, and I've been very honored to be part of the Changemakers.
She tells a similar story of generational influence.
I also pay homage to the changemaker who caused me to be changemaker, which is my mother.
Mimi's mother arrived in the U.S. from China in the early 1960s and quickly became a fierce advocate for her children and families in their neighborhood.
She knew very little English. In elementary school, PS42 in Lower Manhattan, where we kids went. My mom was not happy that the school sent letters home in only English and Spanish, when half the school is Hispanic and half is Chinese. And the Chinese parents had no idea what's going on with the kids at school. So she raised her hand and said, hey, half of us parents don't know what's going on. Is it possible that you can do trilingual and have it in Chinese also?
The request succeeded. Other parents were so impressed, they asked her to run for PTA president.
She goes, what? I don't speak English. How can I run? And they go, no problem. We'll hire a secretary for you to do the English part. So she said, okay, if you do that, I will run. And she ran, she won. So she is the first Chinese PTA president with her own Chinese English secretary.
It's one of many lessons Mimi says inspired her to become a community leader and advocate. Mimi is the president and one of the founders of the Asian Pacific Islander American Association of Greater Rochester. For decades, she's worked to raise the profile of Asian culture and voices, using a recipe of vision and action she learned watching her mother.
The vision is to see a need, and you need to act on it, and you'd be willing to roll up your sleeves and do something about it. And I think that's what makes a change maker, is to have a vision to see and be sensitive to see a need and work to get it done. And you will find that there are so many like-minded people there to support you. It's amazing.
Advocating alongside Mimi, her sister, Lily Lee. Lily served as one of the exhibit's 50 community curators. That's the team that advised on every aspect of the Changemakers exhibit. Reaching consensus on who should be showcased and how wasn't always easy, but the process, Lily says, the months of meetings, discussions, and research, was all worth it.
Whenever you have human beings coming together and we have different ideas, there would be conflict. And learning how to work together as a team. And we saw that, we witnessed that through the museum's exhibit. You know, there were certainly a lot of strong women on those various committees. And the amazing thing is that because of the love for humanity, that's really the bottom line, is to try to put those differences aside and working together, right? Because we are fighting a very systemic society, you know, that's been so entrenched with rules and regulations, policies, and forgetting to be human.
Dr. Irma McLaurin was in the thick of the planning process with Lily and the community curators. She's a biocultural anthropologist hired by the Rochester Museum and Science Center as one of the exhibit's diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants.
I don't know that people necessarily wake up in the morning intentionally tending to be exclusive and not being inclusive, but it happens. And it part of it is so much a part of our culture that we don't necessarily think about it or recognize it as happening until someone points it out.
Dr. McLaurin says prioritizing inclusivity from the onset and developing a well-defined plan for achieving it helps the Changemakers exhibit stand out as an example of what museums should do. Praise aside, Dr. McLaurin says the most important outcome is to accurately inform and ultimately inspire people who see the exhibit, especially children.
And I think we all had that in mind, that it wasn't just the adults that we wanted this exhibit to appeal to, but we wanted to make sure that children, particularly girls, would walk away with a very powerful message of can do, that these were women who sometimes unintentionally, but they had an impact. They made a change. They may not have been famous. They're not all going to be the Susan B. Anthonys.
I think that we have this Hollywood ideal of what change making looks like.
Rochester artist and changemaker Rachel J. Guzman.
The superhero with the cape who comes in and swoops in and changes something, or it has to be someone who's incredibly wealthy. And really, if we look at history, that's not how change happens.
If you need proof, the Changemakers exhibit features example after example.
The story of Carolyn Parker Mount Pleasant.
Of regular women.
She was a wonderful bead worker.
Who never sought fame.
Maria Lopez.
Or fortune, let alone a mention in history books.
We can thank Maria for having Spanish ballads today. That's pretty cool.
Yet their actions.
Dorothy Lane McIntyre, so she was actually the first African-American woman to get a pilot's license.
Their ideas.
Martha Matilda Harper.
Impacted the world.
She grew this business to the point where there were over 400 different franchises throughout the world.
The region and
this is another one of those generational stories.
Their neighbors.
Where we have Joan Coles Howard.
It revives history. It gives truthful history. It shows people can join together and accomplish things. And hopefully it makes people say, oh, well, I didn't know that. Let me go and see if I can find that. Go Google that and see if you can't learn more. Because the more you know about the truth of history, the harder it is, I think, to be separated, to feel inferior or to feel superior. And so anytime you can accomplish that, that's a good thing.
A good thing, says changemaker Joan Coles Howard. A good thing courtesy of a team with a mission.
Really, the goal of the project is for everyone who visits to see themselves as a change maker. So we knew it was very important for everybody to be able to see themselves in these women's stories.
As I reached the end of my tour of the exhibit with the Rochester Museum and Science Center's Senior Director of Collections, Catherine Morano Santos,
Good job. Yeah.
It's fair to say, mission accomplished.
I think the biggest takeaway that I hope visitors who come to see the exhibit have is the realization that they too can be change makers. And so just creating an exhibition like this will hopefully have impacts into the future that we can't even anticipate, because people will feel that sense of empowerment and inspiration that guides their lives.
Thanks for listening to Amended in Action. Special thanks to WRVO Public Media, Humanities New York, and SUNY Oswego's School of Communication, Media, and the Arts. Music provided by Fesliyan Studios. Until next time, I'm Michael Rickey.